Everyone rejoice, for we have finally gotten our hands on the first part of Final Fantasy XVI, bestowed upon us in the form of a glorious demo, available now on PlayStation 5.
And to prevent any potential confusion, let us just say right out the gate that Final Fantasy XVI starts off really strong, giving the impression that it's going to end up becoming a great addition to the Final Fantasy series, as well as a game well worth your money.
That being said, we of course still have some thoughts, some points of admiration, as well as criticism.
As far as openings go, I'm also curious as to how it stacks up against some other classic Final Fantasy openings.
But anyway, I'm Peter,
And I'm Nokwi.
and we are the Birds of Play.
Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already.
And get ready to take on Final Fantasy XVI together with us. We have a lot of Final Fantasy XVI content in the pipeline, and we would love to share it with all of you.
Starting at the beginning of the demo, the first thing that struck me were the opening lines of the game, which reference some historian called Moss the Chronicler. I know this is nitpicking, but I personally felt, in the moment I first heard it, that referencing some obscure figure, or at least obscure at this moment in time, in the very first line of the game, somehow detracted from how iconic the opening line could have otherwise been. I imagine that the way I will process that line later in subsequent playthroughs will be different, but since this is a sort of first impressions thing, I thought I'd mention it. It reminds me of Final Fantasy Tactics or Final Fantasy XII in the sense that they are giving the events of the game a sort of historic flair, but it doesn't feel as earned at the moment in Final Fantasy XVI, even though I do suspect that the game will take a big page out of Tactics and 12 in terms of the role of history and politics and all that stuff.
What a weird thing to start with. The first thing that struck me was how absolutely gorgeous the game looks. The first 2 hours, featured in the demo, offer spectacle after spectacle, pretty seamlessly moving between gameplay and cinematics and integrating pre-rendered cinematics with the graphics of the game in a way that makes it hard to tell which is which. There were some performance issues, yes, even running in frame rate mode, particularly in the first fight between Ifrit and Phoenix at the very beginning of the game, with noticeable stuttering. But I imagine that'll likely be patched out soon if it hasn't already. And we must be mindful, of course, that this is a demo build and does not reflect the final build accurately. It's nothing game-breaking, but it did feel strange to see such noticeable frame drops at the very beginning of the game, where one would think they would be doing all they could to make a good first impression. I sound like a spoiled little brat, I know.
I noticed that too, but then when I played the opening again in Japanese, I didn't notice it as much. So either my eyes got used to it, or it's not an issue that happens every time. But it was strange, even for someone like me who is fairly ambivalent when it comes to the question of frame rates. I did notice it in parts.
Hopefully it'll be fixed. It's a shame to let something like this undermine what otherwise looks just fantastic. But just to be clear, this is not a big or common issue.
Is there anything that you felt was a common issue?
My biggest issue is probably how the pacing of the game was broken by unnecessary tutorials. I mean, I don't need the game to pause and present me with a text box in order to learn how to pick up items, which you do automatically anyway. Instead of making me read what a button does, I wish the game would just show you. More than any Final Fantasy game, this is a game intended for adults, big boys, so the kiddie treatment seems especially out of place. Maybe you could include it in the story mode version, which this game has, but I really wish the game would just let you learn by doing. I mean, learning to press R1 or square in a cinematic QuickTime event shouldn't require more explanation than presenting those buttons on the screen. We don't need a wall of text to explain it to us.
Yeah, maybe the basic tutorials could have been featured as an accessibility feature for new players. It's of course important to learn certain things like combat and how it's unique to Final Fantasy XVI, but I agree that for many things, the text box approach is unnecessary and can break the flow of the game. I feel like this is more common in Japanese games, but then again I don't really play a lot of non-Japanese games, so maybe I shouldn't really comment on it.
Ooh, I also have a nitpick. Young Clive has an icky way of jumping. The way he jumps is very strange. I mean, just look at it. We'll put it up on the screen. He seems like he's having a good time though.
Yeah, I remember you jumping around, and I do agree. It sort of seems like he doesn't finish his jumping animation. It's very weird for some reason.
Again, this is very, very nitpicky. Look at him go! Look at him go! Look at him go!
But what did you think of the combat?
Why am I?
What did you think of the combat?
I thought the combat system feels great, and that it has a lot of potential for a lot of depth. It seems to be accessible to newcomers, but also rewarding to expert players. I mean, during the pre-launch event, which everybody except us seems to have been invited to, we saw the combat director for the game beat an elite 45 level mark with Clive at level 30, which shows that skill can go a long way in the game.
Yeah, we didn't get invited to the pre-launch event, but we did kind of get cameos in the game.
This is true, but also a lie. So when you play the game, please consider Wade and Tyler as cameos for the Birds of Play. That's what we did as soon as we saw them.
Yeah, and that also made us really invested in them. And I hope we will get to see more of them in the rest of the game.
But yeah, the game seems to have it all. Great music, gore, and adult themes. Sexy men, where even the badly treated slave is mildly attractive. You know what? I'd love to see some real uggos instead of everyone in the world being, at the very least, somewhat attractive.
I also think the story is shaping up to be really engaging. The way the very beginning of the game jumped between different people really sold me on the characters and the world in a way the promotional material for the game hadn't really up until that point. It is a very cutscene heavy introduction, which I imagine can be a turn-off for some, but for me it was well worth it, just to establish what's at stake and why we should care. Everything except Master Chronicler. I still don't really know why I should care about him.
I am also invested in the story, so I think the first part of the demo did a great job of selling people on the game, which also means that it's an engaging opening in general. I didn't really see the point in the second part of the demo though, where you fight Benedicta. I understand that it's to show off abilities that won't be available until later in the game, but I feel like they could have done that without attaching it to a part of the story.
Yeah, I can see that. And I agree. I probably would have preferred some generic battle arena where you could just test out some skills, but hey, if it sells people on the game, featuring the adventures of Wade and Tyler, then it's a win in my book, even though it's a bit of a loss. Personally, at least, I would have preferred to just not play that part of the demo. So maybe if anyone watching has yet to try the demo, they could keep that in mind, especially since the game is just around the corner.
Oh, I forgot to say something about the icon battle between Ifrit and Phoenix. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, it's flashy and it contributes to the story, sort of like you're playing a cinematic, but it felt very much on the rails.
Well, it is on rails.
Yeah, and to be fair, they are some very good rails, and they really do their best to sell the fight.
So yeah, there you have it. We loved the opening of Final Fantasy XVI and are excited for more. We can't wait for more, and we can't wait to make more Final Fantasy XVI content, so stay tuned for that.
And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave us a comment telling us how you feel about the opening of Final Fantasy XVI.
But until next time... Oh, by the way, we're birds. That's our gimmick, that's our play. Just in case you're new here. It's not like a furry thing, we just like wordplay. Birds of prey, birds of play. Goodbye.